are. Another round of NMRA X. And today, our first presenter lives in Scotland. So you should be cold as well up there, right? And is originally from England. He has held a variety of roles within the British region, including on the board of directors. His love of things Swedish comes from his mother, who was born in Sweden. He's also a fluent Swedish speaker and once regularly appeared as a Swedish news reporter. Today, he'll be introducing us to the railways of Sweden and giving us a taste of operations on his HO-scale Swedish layout, which has appeared in the UK's Continental Model Railroad magazine and appeared at numerous train shows across the UK. We welcome Mr. Patrick Grace.
Hello. Just as Speed said, I have family connections with Sweden, which is one of the reasons I've modelled it. I've done a lot of modelling of Swedish railways. The other one being that while I was a child, what British trains I saw compared with Swedish trains, the British trains just weren't as nice, and definitely a lot of them did not run as well as the European models did. So that is why I'm interested in the railways of Sweden. First, a little geography. Where is Sweden? Sweden is in northern Europe. It is the eastern side of the Scandinavian peninsula and the fourth largest country in Europe by area. It is roughly 1,000 miles long, and it is possible to get a train from the far south of Sweden all the way up as far as the Lapland Gate, where the line descends down into Narvik in northern Norway. Just the history of the Swedish race. This map here shows is a map of Sweden. The red lines are the main state network, historical main state network. Originally, the state railways built a set of lines that ran from Stockholm to Gothenburg and Malmö to Stockholm, with a link between Nässjö and Falköping. Later on, they built the Northern Main Line, which eventually terminated at Boden, having made its way up the east coast, generally a reasonable distance inland, because there was a fear of a Russian invasion from Finland. The green line at the top of the map is actually the famous iron ore railway, which runs from Narvik over the mountains through the major iron ore centre at Malmberget and Kiruna, down to the harbour at Luleå at the northern end of the Gulf of Bothnia. The orange line is the equally famous inland railway, which the southern section from Mora to Karlstad no longer exists, though there are alternative routes you can take to do that, effectively do that section. The northern section takes 2 days. You have a journey from Mora to Östersund, and then the following day you'd complete the other half of the line. The trains are famous, passenger services only run in summer, and are famous for stopping so you can pick blueberries, or there's a herd of reindeer or a bear, and they always stop when they reach the pole circle just south of Jokkmokk. The blue lines are the Halmstad-Nässjö railway network, or the main lines of the network. There was also a line running up to Falköping, which I've not included to keep the map clearer. These photos, most of these photos were taken at the 150th anniversary celebration of the Swedish Railways in 2006, Sweden being relatively late starting their railways, starting it in 1856. They then managed to build a vast variety of gauges, the most important ones being 4 foot 8.5, 3 foot 6 inches imperial, which is Cape gauge, which there was quite a bit of in bits of southern Sweden. A lot of 891mm gauge, or 3 Swedish feet, which is quite a bit both wet on both the west and east coasts in various areas. In the industrial heartland, there was a selection of 802mm gauge, and there were a few short 600mm gauge lines as well. This loco is actually Prince August. She was one of the number 3 and one of the original locos delivered by Bear Peacock in 1856. She was withdrawn in 1906 and was brought back into operating order in 1956 by fitting a boiler from another loco that had been built in the 20s for one of the private railways. I suppose I should mention a lot of the non-state network was built by private railways. Not all of, I did not show all the state lines in the map, so but there was an awful lot of trackage at its peak. It has reduced somewhat. The next loco is Yerta, which is another Bear Peacock product. She was actually built in 1866 and has been redrawn and is in virtually original condition. There was a little bit of backdating done in 1914, they think, when she was put on display at the Baltic exhibition in that year. This is a slightly later steam engine. This is a CC class, number 404, which was built in 1892 and came to the museum collection in 1929, hauling a short train of vintage coaches past the museum. This is Berg. She was built for a industrial line and is fairly typical of the sort of smaller tank engines that were used by the private railways and industrial concerns within Scandinavia. She's currently plinthed alongside a main line. One of the things that did happen was there was a lot of standardization in terms of rolling stock. Passenger stock in some ways less so, but freight stock people tended, because it was generally bought from a limited number of manufacturers, to build much the same thing. This being a standard 1898 pattern goods van, albeit fitted with more modern bearings at some point in its life. And this is a C3 class coach from around the same sort of period. I believe it's a C3C, but there aren't any markings on the underframe to confirm that. And this vehicle is again a very typical Swedish vehicle. This is an NN3 of the 1898 type. They were used to move timber, both logs, sawn timber, pulp, coal, charcoal. Basically, if they could get it, because the sides will fall down, can be fallen in, so you get a flat open wagon, and basically if they could get it on one of these things, they would move it on them. We're now going to the 891mm gauge. This is a loco from the Dala Ockelbo Norresundet Railway, which was built in 1902 by Falun and has been in preservation since 1961 and is used on the preserved section of the Dala Ockelbo Norresundet Railway. This is one of the two major modern steam locomotive classes operated by the Swedish State Railways. This is a E2 class. The original E class was an inside cylinder 080. The E2 basically involved lengthening the frames forward to add a pony truck, which enabled the speed to be increased by 10 kilometers an hour. They were built from around 1910 right through, and were in service right up until the closure of the Strategic Reserve in the 1980s. This is one of the 99 B-class locomotives, which were from around 1909. The final examples for a private railway were built in the Second World War in 1944. And this is another photograph of one. This one had actually had a little bit of an issue at the National Museum, and some of the valve gear had been removed for repairs. And back to the narrow gauge. This is the Vesta Götalands Railway number 24. This line ran inland from Gothenburg up to the southern side of Lake Vättern and Maria Fred, and was built by NOHAB in 1911, and again preserved fairly early, and now runs on the Anton Grevsnorth Railway. While she was being turned, they actually had the kids help them turn her, and then were showing children inside the cab. Sweden started electrifying very early. This is PA-27, which was built in 1914 and was one of the first passenger locos. It was used on the Arnor line. They found fairly early on that steam engines running in the Arctic was a bit of a problem, and that electrification seriously increased capacity on the line. She's not run very often. She was actually being used, in this case, to haul a special. The locomotive behind her is a D-class from 1925, which was being used to provide protection in case the 1914 loco failed. And here's the same loco again, hauling a rake of 1940s commuter coaches of class B6. Later versions of this class had a steel body, and there were a number that were known as parentheses, where the wood cabs had been damaged and they were replaced with steel cabs. So you had a steel cab at each end and a wood body in the middle, though there were a few where only one cab got converted. And this is a classic 1940s high-speed loco of class F. They ran right up until the 1980s before being withdrawn. They were capable of 135 kilometers an hour maximum. Once the track had been improved to the standard, they could cope with that. And a fairly standard 1940s, late 30s, early 40s shunting locomotive of class Z43. Some are still in use in both industry and also by the Swedish Track Authority. We have a U-class shunter. I can't tell which precise variation, without the number plate, with a NOHAB class T43 diesel hiding behind. These were built, the electric shunters were built between the 1930s and 1950s, and again went late 80s, early 90s, really. This is the standard 1930s closed van. They were known as a standard G. They were built by both the state railways and private railways in quite large numbers at that sort of period and through into the early 50s. This being the insulated van variation of the same vehicle. Many of these were actually covered with various advertisings in the 50s and 60s. This is one of the first large Swedish diesel classes. This is a class D3 built by Esslingen in Germany, and was essentially a modification of the wartime German army standard shunter. They have now all been withdrawn. This loco here is a class S1, the last Swedish steam loco class built in the early 1950s. On an excursion, If you look at the on the right, you will see where they actually managed to set fire to the undergrowth. This is the next major class of loco, a T21. They are an 080 shunter built by MAK in Germany in the late 50s, and there are some of these still in use, but very few. And then we get to the NOHABs, the GM-based locomotives. This is the first version that Swedes had, class T41, which is an A1A machine built in 1956, and essentially it is the same as the Danish, Belgium and Hungarian locos that were built at a similar time by NOHAB, except with a different body. Instead of, it had a road switch style body, not a cab style body. This is a Y6 class rail bus. The Swedes rather liked this sort of idea of the rail bus. The earlier one, there were earlier types from the mid-1930s onwards. They built very large numbers of these in the 1950s to replace the earlier ones and to replace local haulage and secondary routes. The last ones were withdrawn in 1988 and replaced by a more modern Fiat construction. This is one of the famous triple iron ore locomotives of class DM3. Originally, there were just 2 units, which was a class DM. And then they, from 1960, they added on the centre unit to become a DM3. The unit producing something like 7,200 kilowatts of power, and more than capable of hauling iron ore trains. This particular loco en route south to the National Museum from its base with the Iron Ore Railway Historical Society ended up giving a local freight a push, which had got stuck behind. It had a couple of the RC class locos, which our American friends would know as an AEM7, and they had got in the truck, had got stuck on the line, and this thing came up and just pushed them up the hill. This is more the standard Swedish variation of NOHAB. They built 2 classes of these. This is the earlier one, the T43, which were built from 1961 to 63. The T44, which has a slightly different body and a more modern motor, and some other improvements, were built from 1967 through until the early 80s. The Swedes also had, right, this is a RC class. This one specially, this is an RC4, which was specially repainted back into the traditional livery for the 150th celebrations. There were classes RC1 to RC6 plus RM being a specially ballasted freight version. Built over quite a long period, and the Swedes have got something over 350 of them at the maximum. There was also a batch of Austrian locos that came back to Sweden later, which are still in use as well, and this is another version of them. The AEM7 is essentially an RC4 with bogies from the class RC3 fitted to them. Class numbers varied depending on when they were built and the precise gearing. We're now getting to relatively modern technology. This is the class X2000 or X2 high-speed tilt train, which came into service from 1989, with the last examples delivered in 1998. They're all still in use. This is a modern rural DMU of class Y31, a standard Bombardier Itino class built in around 2002. And then we have a Siemens class 441 called in this book for one of the private operators, Hector Rail. And then a little bit about modelling. As a general talk, there are produced by a variety of publishers, mainly in Swedish. The book Norden's Järnvägar, a picture book series, they are in both English and Swedish. All the other books aren't, but it gives you an idea of what is available. These are all currently available via the publisher Frank Stenvall's bookshop in Malmö. Here we have a Swedish RC class and a DA. Both of these models were built by Fleischmann, the DA in the 1950s, and the RC is probably a 1970s model. The DA has done by Marklin and more recently by Roco, which is a far better model. The early RCs have been done by Lima, Marklin, as well as Fleischmann, the Lima one being generally better than the Fleischmann one, but manufacturer Jayco has just done a modern standard model. This little loco is actually a flying Black Anna, which has been modified with a standard Swedish and standard Swedish style cab, based on a couple of articles in the Swedish press where people have done this to a variety of locos, and it produces a reasonably good stand-in for a type of small loco that's quite common. Here we have a Lima loco that was bought by the private TGOJ Railway, and for a couple to a hobby trade refrigerated van with a Lilliput and a Brawa tank wagon, all of which are appropriate. This is the Roco RC 5/6 model, hauling a rake of modern 1980s coaches. The catenary system is made by MJ Hobby in Stockholm. They have since upgraded the system. Another company called Intec, which do a very nice etched brass kit based overhead, but it is an etched brass kit. This is a Jayco HC class electric, hauling a couple of Porspora 1930s commuter locomotives of class B6. A reasonable train for this would be a van, a standard G van, 2 of these coaches, and an HG class. The station building is a Helgen kit of station, but is fairly typical of brick-built Swedish stations. And the strange structure with the pointy roof is a early kiosk design made by a company called Model Unique. Here's Jayco's version of the F in model form with a Heljan and a UGJ coach. Heljan's version of the T21 class locomotive, with a Pico vehicle marked up as a Swedish permanent way vehicle. The Swedes did tend to buy bought a lot of stuff cheap from Germany just after the First World War. This train here, the main train is a Marklin Trix special set of an S-class tank locomotive and 3 woodside coaches. The red trailing coach and the refrigerated van are HNJ Verkstad conversion kits and rely on you providing the appropriate vehicle to fit the conversions to. The station buildings here are a mixture of various plastic kits and wooden kits made by a company called Euromod, who were a Swedish company and made a number of buildings over the years. This is Hobby Trade's version of the standard O-Wagon, the O-Wagon being the more modern version of an NN3. Lima have also done a version of this, as has NMJ, who've done a more modern version of the vehicle. Both the Lima and the Hobby Trade one, much the same vehicle. And here is a Jayco Y6, a number of Burkina Volvos and Scanias, and one of the standard Gs painted in an advertising livery by, it's an NMJ model, and it's advertised around Lowe's Water. We've got this, I've put this photo in to show the Lima standard 1960s coaches as a contrast to the 1980s coaches, which are behind the orange Rapid class locomotive, also a Lima model. The loco in the middle is an HC class, so an earlier version of the HG, made from a resin kit by Model Production, and then the other locomotive is a Fleischmann DA. Here is the other version of the Lima Up Rapid, with modern, which once they'd been modernized and fitted with Marshall lights. Again, a Jayco Y6 with a Model Production bus in the background, and a model. The car is a model mechanic model of a Volvo PV831 that was motorized. The TGOJ had one as an inspection vehicle, and it is currently preserved. If you look at the station building on the back, there's a sort of green panel here. There's actually a signal panel, and these are fairly typical of how things were often done, with the signal panels actually literally bolted to the end of the station and then operated accordingly. This is a class Z65 model. The orange loco is the current production Jayco model fitted with DCC. The other vehicle one is a Hornby toy train set model repainted in Swedish livery. I'm not quite sure why they did it, but they did. It was never done. It is one of a number of K's kits that were made for the Scandinavian market. This being a Swedish class shunter, they actually only weigh about 8 tons in reality, and it is fitted with an SLV CC drive unit. The first diesel had was actually, the Swedes bought was a NOHAB demonstrator of class G12 type. There has been a very expensive brass model made. This particular model is a Frechette model, suitably repainted and with buffers fitted. It is a little bit scale. It is 4 millimeters to the foot, not 3.5. This is a Lima. This is the class T23 in model form, as made by Lima. Jayco have since made a better model with much better running characteristics. The Lima ones were really not heavy enough. And this is Roker's version of the DA class. And I had to put this in. This is a Heljan MY class locomotive, which were for Denmark. A number of them, when the Danish State Railways got rid of them, were bought up by various private freight operators in Sweden and used by them. This loco got painted in this scheme for a film, and it, should we say, the film was awful, but the loco's good. And we have the DM here with some wagons, and the latest Jayco model, which is an E-Class. And I'm just going to say a little bit about Swedish station design. The standard practice is to number your tracks. So we have track 1 nearest the station, 2 in the middle, and 3 on the outside. You have the station building. In fact, this is a better photo. You have your station building, which is here, a toilet block, and then a goods shed and loading ramp. And as you can see, traditionally, there was an awful lot of advertising hung on the side of the loading of the buildings where passing passengers could see it. And then looking from the other direction, we have a telephone box, various station gardens, and this little lump here is actually an earth cellar. Here is a model of a lineman's house with various ancillary buildings, and the lineman's house is an architect model. This is a Swedish model and model mechanic, if I remember rightly, signal. It is set to show drive at 40 kilometers an hour as you pass it. This is a minimalist Swedish station, being basically a shed and a bench. This round sign here is called a plåtstind or steel station master. And what you would do is turn the sign in the direction of the approaching train. The train driver would then hopefully see the sign and come to a halt, at which point you could then climb on the train. Here are a few photographs and a little bit about the layout. The layout is actually based on this red line, which is the fictional branch line heading off from the real Halmstad-Nässjö line. But this is the inspiration. This is Hyltebruk with its large timber processing, paper mill. And then another view of the paper mill here. Though obviously having facilities to cut timber, they would have done other things as well. Here is Hyltebruk station with an early diesel electric rail car coming in. This was, I believe, about 1914. Here is one of the Hilding-Carlsen rail buses, one of the famous Hilding-Carlsen rail buses during the Second World War. So the bags on top are to do with the gas generation system necessary to run the train. And this is what was the basis of the later Y class. This is the fast motor car that was built for the Halmstad-Nässjö by NOHAB in the late 1930s and were used for the prestige trains. Here's just a photograph of the last double-wing semaphore on the network just before it was removed. And we have here an earlier experiment in running a internal combustion engine. It was basically a charcoal gas producer underneath a modified coach. It wasn't very successful. Just a little bit about the station. Track 1, the track 1 is nearest the station building with the main platform between it and the main line, which is track 2. Track 3 is the run round. 4 and 5 serve the factory. Track 6 is a HON3, so 91mm gauge narrow gauge feeder, industrial line used by the factory. Track 7, this area here is the loco facilities, which is number 7. Number 8 is approximately where the entry to the station is, and the shunt limit. The standard operating system being that trains were not allowed into a station in Sweden until they had been cleared by the station master. They had to wait at the signal till they were cleared. They could then enter, and then everything was done then by timetable, and you would mark off as trains passed. Now on to the operations for the day. So the first thing that happens is that the rail bus departs the shed at around 7 o'clock in the morning and goes to the platform and is then prepared to depart, which it then does at 7:20 in the morning. Then at 8:10, the mainline passenger arrives, delivering post and papers. It's hauled by a DEVA. This particular version was effectively a motor luggage van. It is hauling a rake of 3 coaches, the leading coach being a standard buggy vehicle. The second coach is a ex-German Imperial German Army vehicle, and the trailing vehicle, which is hiding at the back, was one of the very early coaches from the railway that by this point was really not being used for anything more than permanent way use. The train then runs round and departs at 9:10, at which point a goods train arrives at 9:30. This train consisting of a typical 060 tank loco, with the leading vehicle being a guard's van stroke for less than carload freight and parcels traffic. There are then a couple of vans. The vehicle at the rear is a NN3 timber carrier. The black vehicle is a charcoal wagon, and the white vehicle is actually a chlorine tank wagon for bleaching paper products. It is turned and cold and watered as necessary. The Swedes tend to always run their locos chimney first. Once the train has been shunted, the loco sits out the way. And here we've got the industrial loco pushing a typical sort of sawmill trolley. The rail bus arrives at 10:30 in the morning and parks on platform 3. The goods, having shunted, prepares to depart and depart at 12 o'clock. The rail bus then departs at 1:10, and at 2 o'clock, the next train comes up, having done a variety of things in its way. The coach is actually has baggage facilities within it, as well as passenger facilities. It again shunts. Here we can see the factory building. I need to add more factory building. And then departs again at 4 o'clock. The second goods arrives at 7 o'clock behind, in this case, behind an 060 tender machine, seen here crossing the bridge towards the station. Again, it all shunts and gets out the way. The rail bus then arrives at 18:45, and the goods then departs at 19:30, heading back towards Halmstad. It's sitting here ready to depart with its selection of wagons, and here it is leaving the station. The rail bus again departs towards Halmstad at 20:25, and here is the high-speed unit coming in. This is the high-speed motor car, which has come in at 21:30 to basically deliver people who've been to the beach in the Halmstad area back here, and also to collect people who've been inland to the forests and take them back to Halmstad. It departs again at 9:30. The last train of the day arrives at 20 past midnight, when the rail bus returns and then proceeds to go back to the shed. And a couple of models just to finish. This is my version of the Kohlgasvagn. It's based on one single photo that I had in a book. I should probably redo it at some point, but I haven't. And this is a slightly unusual vehicle that only HNJ operated, which was a 3-axle NN3 effective NN1 sorry, not NN3. They were unique to the Halmstad Esher Railway. And interestingly, it was also unbraked. Historically, you get one braked vehicle to two unbraked vehicles on a lot of the Swedish railways.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Were those last photos all from your own layout?
Yes, most of the model photos were from my own layout, except for the ones that were taken where the ground was black. That was actually from a friend's layout. He had a layout outside, but it's either my pre-war layout or the other ones were actually taken on a layout that I've got that's based on the 1960s.
Cool. So what kind of building is that with that big roll-up door?
Pardon?
You in the last photo, you had a big roll-up door.
Ah, yes, I have a large. I have a large garage. The house as built. The people who built it used it to store stuff for their business, and when we bought it, of course, we got a very nice layout room with easy access to get things in and out.
Sorry for me, my laptop says its battery is low. There's one question online that asks, what is the platform height in Sweden, as the running boards look quite high?
It depends, which is an awful answer. They vary from literally more or less ground level up. Some of the more modern stations are the level has increased over time. I'm not sure what the current height is. I know the Stockholm Underground is full height, and a lot of the more modern stations are sort of going in that direction as well.
Cool. We have one more question
Yep.
for you, Patrick, from Andy. Andy asks, are KD standard in Swedish railway modelling, or is this something that you've put on yourself?
I've put the KDs on. Swedish models depends on the manufacturer, with being European models. Most of them tend to use the standard Swedish or standard Markling type hook and loop, but Roco models will come with their own coupling. The modern models all come with NEM boxes, so it's fairly easy to put on what you want. There is a Swedish pattern coupling used by a number of modelers in Sweden, which is, I think, called the Telex, if I remember rightly. But yeah, I mean, they basically use anything that will fit in an NEM box that suits them.
Cool. I think that's all the questions that we've got. So thank you very much for flying through that. Thank you for everyone for sticking with us.
Yeah, apologies if it was